Welcome back to Racing Rundown. This is the final preview of 3 that we're going to have this week on Racing Rundown, and this is a preview of the Grade 1 Awesome Again and Winning You're In for the Breeders' Cup Classic, 1 1/8 at Santa Anita. Just a couple things to get to before we get into looking at this race. Obviously, 8 horses in it. We'll talk about all of them. But first, just want to mention a couple of things. We do have 2 other previews. Eric did a preview of the Champagne. There will be a link below to that in the description. And we also did a big preview for the Arc de Triomphe, which is on Sunday. We went through every single horse. It's over an hour long, so it's definitely a way too long. Definitely more information than you need to know for the Arc de Triomphe preview. But wanted to do that because it is a very fascinating race. There will be links in the description below to both of those videos, so be sure to check those out. And with that being said, we're going to start off with the number 1 horse in this Awesome Again, and that is Azul Coast, one of 4 horses in this race for Bob Baffert, and one of 2 horses in this race owned by the ownership group headed by Mike Pegram. Azul Coast is the longest priced of the Bafferts in this race, and rightfully so, because he has not started since last December in the San Antonio. But prior to that start, did win the Native Diver at Del Mar. Wasn't a great field that he went up against there, but he did take that race out. But prior to that was on a very iffy form stretch. He did win an allowance race at Del Mar in August of 2021, but his stakes efforts in races where he's facing top-level competition have been very subpar. He was a horse on the 2020 Kentucky Derby Trail, ran 7th in the Santa Anita Derby, and then tried the Turf in August of 2020, and then tried a 1.5 miles in 2020 as well. So those 3 races didn't really work out for him. Awesome Again last year, similarly, did not work out for him. Azul Coast is just a horse in this race that is overmatched and not graded stakes caliber, and so he's an easy pass in this race. We're going to move on now to the number 2 horse in this race, and that's Royal Ship, winner of the San Diego Del Mar this past meet, and Royal Ship has had a very interesting career. He's the kind of horse that every single time you think he's not going to run his A race, he goes and he wins that race where you don't think he's going to do that. Didn't think he could win the San Diego, goes and wins that last year. He did that in the Californian. However, the thing with him though is he's also a very much a one-time-a-year kind of horse. So he won the Californian last year, disappointed in his 3 subsequent stake starts in 2021. This year he does have 2 wins, but his win in the John Shear Mile was just basically a paid workout and a procession for him there. Subsequently did lose the Hollywood Gold Cup as the favorite, and then didn't really have a chance in the Pacific Classic. He was blown out by Flightline, but he was beaten 7 lengths for second by Country Grammar in the real horse race. For everybody else that was showing up in that Pacific Classic. And Royal Ship is just a horse that's impossible to depend on. I resigned myself to the fact a long time ago that I was never going to pick him, and I say a long time ago, and I really mean after the Hollywood Gold Cup, just because I forgot that I had him there. But he's just a horse that you can never depend on, and I'm not willing to trust him in this race, so I'm going to take a pass on him for the reason that every single time you think he can run a winning race, he loses, and then every single time you don't think he can win, he goes out and wins that. So I'm not willing to get beat with him in this spot. So if he wins, throw my hands up in the air. Oh well, not really too much that you can do with that with him. But he's just not a horse that you can depend on. So I'm not going to burn my money on him again. We're going to move on now to the number 3 horse in this race, another horse for Bob Baffert. That's High Connection, winner of the Los Alamitos Derby back in July, and then subsequently from that was second in the Shared Belief Stakes. This is a horse that's been, very off and on in terms of, he's never been worse than second, but he's been very off and on in his stakes races, and he got beat by a big long shot, Gojo 1, last time in the Shared Belief in the Affirmed, which was his stakes debut. He got beat by Hopper by 5 lengths, and Hopper was a horse who, I don't like any of these Baffert 3-year-olds, but certain circles really liked Hopper, so that might, you might read into that and think a little bit better of it than I did. And then splitting those 2, I mentioned he won the Los Alamitos Derby. He did beat Slowdown Andy in that race, and Slowdown Andy came back, is also in this race, but Slowdown Andy came back to run a pretty good race in the Del Mar Derby on turf. So he does have some okay form lines, but he also lost last time a race that he really should have won. And even if he did get the bob there, I would still think that the 12-1 on him would be earned. And I think he's a cup below really true graded stakes caliber. He's not a graded stakes winner. I think he's a cup below. He can, if he catches a light field, if he were to come back and run in a race like the Native Diver, I think he could win that. But he's not going to win a serious graded stakes race against true graded stakes caliber horses. We're going to move on now to the number 4 horse in this race, and that is Country Grammar, the likely favorite in this spot, winner of the Dubai World Cup and runner-up in the Pacific Classic last time. Country Grammar has not really done anything wrong this year. I can always forgive horses, especially Bob Baffert horses, because Bob Baffert's record bringing horses back from the Middle East is very bad. I don't remember exactly what the statistic is, but doesn't have a good record in the San Diego. And then subsequently, Country Grammar wasn't going to be able to beat Flightline in the Pacific Classic that day. So I thought that he ran a winning effort there. And his 2 starts in the Middle East have been very good, or I should say were very good. Dubai World Cup, while that race has come back to be very weak, it was still a strong effort for him. The start before that in the Saudi Cup was off a very significant layoff there, and just barely missed getting the job done there. The big concern is I think this horse is, I should say that I truly think this horse is a 1.25 mile specialist, and his record at 1 1/8 isn't great. He's won at the distance before. He won the Peter Pan when that race was contested at Saratoga back in 2020, but he's beaten by Royal Ship on 2 occasions at 1 1/8 in the Californian last year and the San Diego this year. Now, I might chalk that up to the San Diego this year at least, to the layoff and coming back from the Middle East, but it's something to think about. Maybe Country Grammar is just truly a 1.25 mile specialist type horse and not one that you really want to go with in a race where you're going 1 1/8. That being said, though, Country Grammar is going to be my pick in this race just because I don't really like anybody else in here, and I thought that he ran a fine race last time. It did as much as he could against Flightline in the Pacific Classic, so I'm going to take him in this spot, despite the fact that he'll be favored, and I am a little bit suspect if 1 1/8 is exactly his true distance. I'm going to move on now to the number 5 horse. That's Tripoli, winner of the Pacific Classic last year. The big thing with Tripoli, I have talked about it on Racing Rundown several times before. Tripoli is a member of what I call the Sadler Special Group, and that is when John Sadler takes horses that are running at allowance level for other trainers or in different circumstances, gets them into a grade 1, gets them a grade 1 win, and then they never run back to that form again. Tripoli is a perfect example of this kind of horse. He hasn't finished in the money since his Pacific Classic win last year. 4th in the Awesome again, 4th in the American, and then 6th in the San Diego last time and 7th in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So his form as of late has really not been good. And like I said, the Sadler Special is you get him that one time. If you don't get him that one time, most likely you're going to be out of luck. I don't want to try Tripoli again because I got him that one time. And as I said, I really do believe in this Sadler Special thing. So I don't really have too many positive things to say about Tripoli in this race. The price is good, but again, this is what the formula is for Sadler, and it seems as if his best races, Tripoli's best races, are behind him. Now we're going to move on to the final Bob Baffert horse in this race, and that is Defunded. Defunded was a horse that I actually gave some consideration to in the Hollywood Gold Cup, ultimately decided not to go with him, and that was really the Defunded's race to win this year. It came up so weak, and there was really nobody that was a 1.25 mile type or really graded stakes caliber in there, although somehow Royal Ship has come back to win another graded stakes race. But subsequently from that, the San Diego did not go well for him at all. He did run in the Pat O'Brien as opposed to trying Flightline in the Pacific Classic. Didn't really do, or I should say, make much of a difference for him in that race. He was beaten in a similar way to the fashion he was beaten in the San Diego. He's just a cup below graded stakes caliber. Again, as I said, his opportunity to win a graded stakes race was in the Hollywood Gold Cup. He didn't get it. I don't think he's going to get it in this spot. He doesn't look like he's a graded stakes caliber. He's 6-1, but I would say that I view him 3rd of the 4 Bob Baffert horses in here. And that's kind of difficult to say because I think it's Country Grammar and the rest of them are all equal, but I think Defunded is weaker than High Connection is. So if you're just looking at this race from a mathematics perspective, and maybe you want to box a Baffert Exacta, I would box Country Grammar with High Connection before I would include Defunded or his or common ownership mate with Mike Pegram in this race. But that's my read on Defunded. We're going to move on now to the number 7 horse in this race, and that is Express Train, a horse who really likes Santa Anita, really likes a mile and an eighth, but at the same time is another one that's difficult to depend on. He was very good in the winter. He won all the handicap races out in California, a stretch of 3, the San Antonio, the San Pasqual, into the Santa Anita handicap, and he got beat in a very, very bad fashion by Stiletto Boy in the Californian, and that was a race where it looked like it was going to be an absolute, just a formality for Express Train in there, and then he got beat, and then didn't run until the Pacific Classic. Now, he was never going to win the Pacific Classic because nobody else in that race was going to win, but at the same time, Express Train I'm playing against him more off of the Californian effort than the Pacific Classic effort, and I guess you could say the one good thing about Express Train is he does have good Santa Anita form. 3 stakes wins came there, and if you go back to last year, he won the San Pasqual in 2021 and was second in the Grade 1 Malibu in 2020, so he does have good form over Santa Anita. The big issue is with Express Train is the lack of recent form, specifically in the last 2 races, and as I said, the big one that's the concern for me is the loss to Stiletto Boy in the Californian, because that was a race that I really thought he had no excuse to not win, and he lost it anyway. We're going to move on now to the final horse, and that's Slow Down Andy. Multiple graded stakes winner. This horse has had a very peculiar career. Originally was on the Kentucky Derby Trail, and he has 3 graded stakes wins in 3 different fashions. He won the Sunland Derby and the Los Alamitos Futurity on the Kentucky Derby Trail, and then he won the Del Mar Derby last time out, which Eric had him in that race. It looked like it was a change of dynamics for Slow Down Andy. The big thing for him is he is a horse that can win in any circumstance when he is lone speed, and he was lone speed in that race. But it really looked like that Doug O'Neill and Connections had found a groove for Slow Down Andy with the turf, and Doug O'Neill is a kind of guy who can get aggressive at times, and this is a race where, I'm not going to say it's a weak race, but Country Grammar's vulnerable, and if Country Grammar loses, or if Country Grammar's not winning the race, and I think anybody else in this race can. So they're taking an opportunity to try to see if they can get a Grade 1 into this horse, maybe get a Grade 1 placing, and, who knows, if he does win this race, they might try him in the Breeders' Cup Classic, something like that. But I think that Slow Down Andy really found something last time with the Del Mar Derby. I don't like him getting back on the dirt here in this race. There's not a great other alternative or in terms of other speed in this race. It's a little bit hazy, but I don't think Slow Down Andy's going to get a lone speed perfectly trip out like he did in the Del Mar Derby. And at the same time, Slow Down Andy, while I have more respect for him than the average person probably does, it's not like he was beating anything great, and he did lose to High Connection in the Los Alamitos Derby, and I already made my points or my feelings known about High Connection, so not really into Slow Down Andy for this race, all things considered. And with that being said, as I already mentioned, my pick for this race is going to be Country Grammar. I don't really have too much underneath that I would go with. As I said, the de facto thing that I'll give out there is I would say of the 3 other Bafferts in this race, I would prefer High Connection, but that's just as a formality. Country Grammar is really the only one that I think is worth taking in this race. As I said, I'm going to be picking him, and there's not really too much else in this race. We did just want to do this because it's a Breeders' Cup Classic race, and it's a win and you're in, but I think it's going to be a Country Grammar race, and if he doesn't win, I'll be pretty surprised, and it'll just reflect on this handicap division in California when horses like Flightline don't show up. It's a very easy, or it's a very wide open division, I should say. That being said, be sure to check out our other previews on Racing Rundown, and we will see you next week. Have a good one.